In 1956, in a small rural Japanese town, Keiichi Tsuchiya was born, an underground street racer turned professional race car driver, the man who would turn a niche Japanese obsession into a worldwide automotive phenomenon. Keiichi Tsuchiya may have been the name he was given at birth, but in the annals of history, he'll be remembered as the Drift King. Our story starts in a small Japanese town of Tomi, where the nearby mountains are filled with winding roads called toge. Because you see, out here in the countryside, public transportation infrastructure is still quite lacking, so unlike Tokyo or other big city counterparts, rather than getting on a train, you get in a car and you drive. At night, young Keiichi would hear the sounds of the hashiriya, or street racers, sweeping through the nearby Usui Pass. And he'd hear this like every night. So one day he wanted to see racing in person rather than just hearing it from his bedroom. So he picked up his scooter and rode 120 miles to the Fuji Speedway. That's where he watched Kunimitsu Takahashi overtake the other racers with his sliding car technique, or drifting. Something about watching this race stuck with him that day, and well, it left him with the need for speed. But he didn't jump into racing immediately. You'd think he'd get in his car and start challenging other hashiriya, but he didn't. He actually didn't want to race with others at the beginning because he thought the mountain passes were too dangerous. Sheer cliffs, hairpin turns, like I get it. So Keiichi spent the next 4 years training. Just him, his car, and lots of empty farmland. By the time he did start racing other people, he was absolutely cooking everyone, just dusting all the other racers. It's like he just stepped out of the hyperbolic time chamber. He's the main character and he just finished his training arc. His driving was aggressive. The other racers loved his style, especially the way that he'd attack corners. The way he slid his car sideways to keep the momentum rather than slowing down to take the turn. After beating all the local racers, tons of hashiriya from other areas of Japan would challenge Keiichi on the mountain, and he just put belt to ass per usual. He won so much that he got called the King of the Mountain. His racing skill would eventually get him into professional racing. Kinda nuts, right? This isn't like Max Verstappen, who started super young and comes from a racing family. He got his reps in on the mountain, on some empty farmland, and during late night street races. He had to work his way up from the absolute bottom. His first big break was winning a bunch of races in what would become his signature car, a humble Toyota AE86 Corolla, nicknamed Hachiroku. Hachiroku just means 86 in Japanese. And it wasn't the most powerful car, like at all. Hachiroku only had 130 horsepower, but it was light and it was balanced, which allowed for greater control. And this greater control was his main advantage against the fancier and faster cars. Because, this is back in the day, tires had horrible traction, and this control allowed Keiichi to initiate drifts, which is pretty much the most effective way to go around tight corners when there's not that much traction. And he was used to this, because on the mountain there's like gravel and snow and rain. These are conditions he's trained for, and that's why he is so good at drifting. This is what Doc Hudson was trying to teach Lightning McQueen in Radiator Springs.
This ain't asphalt, son, this is dirt. You don't have three-wheel brakes, so you gotta pitch it hard, break it loose, and just drive it with the throttle. If you're going hard enough left, you'll find yourself turning right.
Anyways, Keiichi's aggressive driving style net him a lot of wins because his way of drifting allowed him to overtake a lot of opponents in low traction conditions. And even with his professional driving wins, Keiichi still drove and practiced on the mountain. One day, a car magazine came by and decided to film his drifts and how he drove down the mountain. After filming, they slapped the title Drift King on it and sold the tapes. Keiichi almost got his racing license revoked because this is a record of him driving extremely aggressively on public roads and is pretty much illegal, but he didn't get his license revoked. If anything, these Drift King tapes boost his stardom even more. In addition to ascending to racing legend, here are some other accomplishments. He won his class at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, he finished second overall there in 1999, he raced in Japan's top touring car series, and even tried NASCAR. He was cracked. He consulted on Initial D, the street racing anime where the main character drives an AE86. He even did some stunt driving for the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. Keiichi Tsuchiya once said regarding his drifting, "I drift to overtake, not because it is the quickest way around the corner, but it's the most exciting way." And Larry Chen, a car culture journalist, said this about Tsuchiya. "Honestly, he's one of the best, from what I can tell, of all time at drifting stock vehicles. Anybody can drift the drift car, but for somebody to just jump in something that wasn't meant to drift, and he can drift it, on camera, on cue, it's something special." So yeah, the Drift King. He's the quintessential cool guy. But what does it even mean when someone is cool? There's so many definitions to the word, and there are tons of different qualities that make a person cool. I'm not articulate enough to describe cool, but when I say something is cool, like the Drift King, you know what I mean. Like, I Show Speed, he's someone I consider to be really cool. His world tours, his music, I think it's all awesome. It's just that everyone knows who Speed is at this point. And this video is about a few lesser known people that I consider really cool, and you should too. And there's no way you know about all these people I'm going to talk about. So let me take you to a weird and interesting time commonly known as the 70s. The early 70s were a weird time. It was a key transitional period where the culture was shifting. Well, it's more of a battle than a shift, a clash between the idealist conservatism of the 60s versus the new wave. The emergence of important social and cultural movements like environmentalism and second wave feminism, black pride, and LGBTQ+ movements, along with the conservative backlash that came with all of these. A lot was going on. The 1970s were one of the time periods of all time. And it definitely shows in the music of the time as well. Various genres would come out of the mainstream, mainly funk, disco, hard rock, and punk. But while the rest of the US was busting it down to disco or rock and roll, the Bronx was economically overlooked. Crime, gang violence, the usual. So you weren't going to find your next-gen sound in a guitar or music store like everywhere else. You were going to find it in some antiquated funk records you got at the thrift store for a couple of cents. Whether you want to call it a culture, a sound, a genre, or an idea, it's probably all of these, because this is where hip-hop started. And the man to start it was DJ Kool Herc, also known as the father of hip-hop. Hip-hop. Probably the most, if not the most, impactful cultural movement of the last 4 to 5 decades. If you wanted to know his full government, it's Clive Campbell. He grew up in Kingston, Jamaica, and when he was 12, he immigrated to the Bronx in 1967. He'd spend most of his time out dancing in clubs or messing around with graffiti art. And he just wanted to have fun. Clive Campbell would eventually become Kool Herc, a mix of cool, which came from the Kool cigarettes commercials, and Herc, short for Hercules because of his athletic abilities when it came to stuff like basketball and track and field. His DJ skills started when his dad, a mechanic, would bring home speaker systems. His dad had no idea what to do with them, so Herc would just mess around with them, buy a couple of records to see how they worked and sounded. DJ Kool Herc would then, DJ. He wasn't a regular DJ though, because back then DJs would kinda just be there to swap out songs and change the music, but Herc realized that the DJ was an instrument in itself, a way to curate the vibe. The DJ was the one to control the room and manipulate the energy of a party. Herc noticed something. During the breaks in the song, the spaces where vocals would drop out and you just hear the instrumentals like drums and bass, people would go crazy. The breaks in the song would really go on for like 20 seconds, and Mr. Kool Herc saw that the people really enjoyed the breaks and thought to himself, people really like this. What if I could make it longer? So he created a technique called the merry-go-round, where he had 2 copies of the same record on 2 different turntables. When the break ends on one of them, he'd cue it up on the other and switch over, creating a perfect loop. This way, he was able to turn a 20-second break in a song into a 1 minute, 5 minute, 10 minutes, or however long he felt like. This seems pretty common and simple now, but this looped break was revolutionary. People would dance crazy, which would evolve into break dancing. People would talk over the break, MCs hyping it up, call and response. This would eventually become rap. So break dancing, rapping, you can kind of see where the foundations of hip-hop were starting. What makes DJ Kool Herc cool, besides him just looking sick, is that he wanted to make a space for people to have fun. He threw parties. At first, it was in a small rec room of the apartment complex he lived in at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, but it would quickly grow to the point where they'd have their parties outside at nearby parks. And these parties and these gatherings were a place separated from the economic and social turmoils of the 70s Bronx. A place where young people could express themselves, whether it be through how they dressed, the music, or how they danced. These spaces fostered a community and a culture that would become modern-day hip-hop. DJ Kool Herc would influence legends like LL Cool J and Grandmaster Flash, and those guys would go on to influence people like Run DMC, Nas, Jay-Z, Wu-Tang Clan, and the snowball continues and continues and continues. The attitude, the cultural impact, the really big speakers. Everything about DJ Kool Herc is cool. In 1943, about 2 years after the US entered the Second World War, the US Air Force really worried about one thing, the Messerschmitt Me-262. The Germans had developed the world's first fighter jet. Afraid of falling behind in this arms race, the Air Force needed a fighter jet of their own. The US Air Force did have a jet engine program, but they didn't really use it that much, and it was really underdeveloped. They wanted to focus more on planes that could be used immediately, rather than ones that required time and resources in order to research and develop. They needed a jet, and they needed one as soon as possible. The problem is that the jet-powered plane needed to fly faster than 500 miles per hour in order to match the Me-262. This means that this new jet has to be 25% faster than all the mass-produced planes they were already popping out. It would be absolutely insane for any of the military contractors to take up this task, but if you needed a wild experimental plane and you needed it fast, there was really only one guy who'd do it. Clarence Kelly Johnson. There's really only 2 things you need to know about Kelly Johnson. 1, he really liked designing aircrafts, and 2, he really hated bureaucracy, which honestly is probably really good for a wartime aerospace engineer, because the US Air Force basically walked into Lockheed and said, hey, we need a jet fighter, it needs to be faster than anything that currently exists, the Germans already have one, and we really need it as soon as possible. Most contractors and companies would respond with something like, yeah, sure, we'll form a strategic planning committee and we'll talk about it. Kelly Johnson just said, I'll get it done, just give me a small team, put us in a corner and don't talk to us. Normally his requests would be pretty easy, but it's wartime, so there weren't any spare engineers or extra machinery, they didn't even have any extra space at the facility. At this point during the war, Lockheed was producing 28 planes per day, so it was all hands on deck. But Kelly Johnson is a really good salesman and he's really convincing. He convinced Lockheed to let him form a tiny, semi-secret development group. They agreed to give him whatever resources he needed under a few conditions. They basically told him, you need to make your own engineering team, you need to find your own production people, so like mechanics and manufacturers, and you gotta find your own place to work on this. So Kelly Johnson went to work. He sniped the best engineers, the best mechanics, and the best people he could find. More importantly though, he looked for people who would run with his motto. He had this all over his workbooks and notes. Damn it, do it. He was really Nike before Nike. He set up a circus tent in an open area on the far end of the Lockheed complex next to the wind tunnel. Being close to the wind tunnel made it convenient for testing prototypes, but there were also 2 other reasons why he selected this spot. First is that it's the furthest place from the offices, so there's pretty much no one around, and if anyone did want to talk to him, they'd have to make the trek out there. And second, on the far side of this open area, there was a plastics factory. The fumes from the factory made the area smell really bad, and again, made it so people wouldn't want to come close to where he was working. The place constantly smelled like chemicals, which honestly might explain why they worked so fast. This little group would become known as Skunk Works, which would eventually become Lockheed Martin's Advanced Development Program, or ADP. Anyways, Kelly's team was given 180 days to build America's first operational jet fighter. 180 days, 6 months. Nowadays, getting a logo approved in 6 months is probably not going to happen, let alone a jet. Kelly's engineering team built the XP-80 in 143 days, from a blank sheet of paper to an actual flying jet prototype, 4 months and some change. The modern military-industrial complex could never. Again, Kelly didn't do this by himself, he's not some lone genius in a lab doing everything, he had a small team of smart people that he selected. But he created some rules for all these people to follow, and for the entire operation to follow. He created something called Kelly's 14 rules, which a few of them include keep the team small, only essential people in the room, trust the engineers, keep paperwork minimal, and the customer gets updates, not control. Which honestly, this is like what businesses are supposed to do now, but in 1943 it was new, and it worked. The experimental XP-80 became the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. And that was just the warm-up, because later during the Cold War, the CIA needed something even more ridiculous. They needed a plane that can fly over the Soviet Union without being shot down. And well, Kelly's solution was don't outgun the missiles, outrun them, outclimb them. This mindset gave us the U-2 spy plane and then eventually the SR-71 Blackbird. And the SR-71 Blackbird is something out of science fiction. It didn't have any evasive maneuvers, it was just that fast, because when a missile was launched at it, the pilot would just push the throttle forwards a bit. The SR-71 it went at Mach 3, that's over 2,000 miles per hour. It flew so high that pilots had to wear a full pressure suit like an astronaut. The metal skin expanded several inches at speed. When it was on the ground, it would leak fuel because the design itself only sealed up when it was hot. So during his tenure, Kelly Johnson designed and helped work on projects that were highly classified and highly secretive at the time. But it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the government or the military, Kelly Johnson just could not stand one thing. He couldn't stand inefficiency. He believed that the engineer must be allowed to operate with minimum interference. Essentially, he's just saying, just let him cook. And to him, there was nothing more inefficient than red tape and bureaucracy. And he was really good at protecting his engineering teams from all this. That way, they could focus entirely on solving the impossible. Kelly Johnson was an engineer at heart. He was offered the position of company president 3 times, and he declined every single time, just so he could keep working at Skunk Works, either doing engineering work or overseeing the projects. He retired in 1975, but even after that, he continued working as a consultant for a couple years. And bro is cool. He's an engineer, and he did engineering things, and he hated inefficiency, he built cool stuff. What's cooler than that? Staying in the same time period, we'll head over about 50 miles south of Palmsdale, where Lockheed is, to a little place called Hollywood. And there's a popular actress named Heidi Lamar. As an actress in Hollywood in the 40s, there was really 3 things women were expected to do: be pretty, stand next to a man, and not talk too much. Heidi Lamar looked at the system and said, "That's cool and all, but like, what if I wanted to create Wi-Fi?" Heidi Lamar, once considered to be the most beautiful actress in Hollywood, was also an inventor. Heidi Lamar was born Hedwig Kiesler in Vienna, Austria, November 9, 1914. She showed an early interest in theater and performing, so that's what she did. She became pretty famous in Europe, which led to her meeting and marrying a dude named Friedrich Mandel, a super wealthy Austrian arms dealer. She was 18 and bro was 33. Problematic age gap, maybe? Well, Mandel was also a fascist. He had connections to the Italians and the Germans, so he did a lot of business with the early Axis powers. Lamar would join Mandel at whatever business meetings he had and would just sit in and listen on their conversations, absorbing whatever classified details and high-level technical jargon was being discussed. Mandel would work with scientists and industry professionals in the field of military technology. So sitting in on these conversations and listening is how Lamar would get introduced to applied sciences and grow her interest in technology. Her husband, like many bros in the 40s, was very controlling and really didn't like her acting, so she decided to leave him. According to her, she disguised herself as a maid and left to Paris. Others say that she went to a dinner party with Mandel and straight up just disappeared after. She eventually made it to Hollywood and became a star. The studio marketed her as the most beautiful woman in the world. On her free time, sometimes on set between takes, she would draft and design stuff, which itself is kinda wild since she had no formal schooling or training on anything STEM. It was all self-taught. She came up with ideas from like a new traffic light system to a tablet that would make water into soda. Imagine if Margot Robbie conceptualized and started programming an LLM in between takes while filming The Wolf of Wall Street. Same energy. And while she's in Hollywood, World War II is happening, German U-boats are sinking Allied ships, and naval warfare is evolving. One of the big ideas at the time was radio-controlled torpedoes, which sounds great until you realize that radio signals can be jammed, and the enemy will absolutely jam them. Heidi Lamar, sitting in Hollywood, thought, okay, but what if you couldn't jam it? A casual thought. She teamed up with composer George Antheil, and Thiel had experience synchronizing multiple playing pianos, and together they came up with the idea of frequency hopping. Instead of sending a signal on one fixed radio frequency, you rapidly switch frequencies in a synchronized pattern, so even if someone does try to jam the signal, they don't know what frequency you'll be on next. They submitted their design to the National Inventors Council and subsequently met with Samuel Macone, professor of electrical engineering at Caltech, who helped consult on the design. In 1942, they patented the system, US Patent 2292387. They submitted it to the US Navy. The US Navy basically looked at it and said, thanks, but no thanks.
No hammers, no inventions, no spin attacks, no mayonnaise!
After this, Heidi tried joining the National Inventors Council, but was pretty much told, nah, you should sell war bonds because you're famous and you're pretty. Which she did. In 1942, during one fundraising period, she raised about $25 million. That's $25 million in 1942 money. And her invention, well, kind of just sat there. It just wasn't thought about or used. The patent expired, but the idea was still there. Eventually, by eventually I mean like decades later, the US military would use frequency hopping to detect submarines and then to control torpedoes. The spread spectrum tech became the foundation for a modern communications technology, which would eventually become GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all 3 of which rely on frequency hopping or spread spectrum principles. So if you're using AirPods to watch this video on your phone connected to Wi-Fi or cellular data, you are in a small way benefiting from Heidi Lamar, which is wild. Because, Heidi Lamar is a Hollywood icon who escaped authoritarian Europe, who absorbed military technology in order to invent a communication system as a side project. And she also talked about herself in the third person sometimes. What's cooler than that? So in review, this list of cool people, we got Keiichi Tsuchiya, the Drift King, enough said, DJ Kool Herc, the father of hip-hop, the most culturally influential movement of the last couple decades, Clarence Kelly Johnson, aerospace and systems engineer, who designed some of the craziest aircraft to ever exist, and Heidi Lamar, Hollywood baddie and pioneer of modern wireless communications. This list is pretty stacked, so who could be the last guy? Well, he's a guy named Chuck Feeney. And what did he do? He was a billionaire.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay, I know, hear me out. In the 1960s, Chuck Feeney co-founded a company called Duty Free Shoppers. It's the place you go to when you want to buy a bottle of Henny and a Louis V bag at 5 a.m. during your 7-hour
Yeah, y'all,
wait.
happy Saturday. Henny on the rock.
It's the airport shop, and it made him billions. And Chuck Feeney looked at the situation and all this money and thought, okay, so how do I get rid of it? Chuck was born in 1931 in New Jersey. He's Irish American, Depression era kid, and not a big fan of excess. He grew up poor and he served in the Korean War, and he paid his way through college by selling sandwiches to other students. Fast forward a couple decades, he's become the founder of DFS in the 60s, and then he founded General Atlantic, an investment firm, in 1980. Then in 1982, he created Atlantic Philanthropies, a nonprofit, all while being worth billions of dollars. But Chuck is a sneaky guy. In 1984, he secretly transferred his 38.75% stake in DFS to Atlantic Philanthropies, so technically, he didn't own any shares of the company. No one knew, not even his close friends and business partners. In 1996, he sold the shares to the Louis Vuitton conglomerate, and the sale to LV netted the charity foundation about $500 million. And during this entire time, all the money Chuck made was put into General Atlantic to invest most of the assets he made to gain more capital. In the 2000s, the money was invested in stuff like Facebook and Alibaba, for example. The money in General Atlantic would be taken out and put into Atlantic Philanthropies when there was some project or cause to give to. Chuck said regarding General Atlantic, "We've managed the fund so efficiently it's growing faster than I can spend it." So if you're not keeping up, Chuck made money, he put it into General Atlantic to invest, and then the money would go to Atlantic Philanthropies to be given away. And from its inception, Atlantic Philanthropies gave away millions of dollars a day, and Chuck didn't say anything. He didn't tell anyone what he did or where his money was going. He even required the recipients of the donations to not share where the money was coming from. For years and years, he quietly gave away his fortune. Nowadays, when a large sum of money is given away to charity, you have some kind of big event or a press conference, they might name a building or at least a park bench after you, and on Jaw, you'll definitely see a LinkedIn post about it. But not Chuck. People didn't know he was the one funding half of these projects. So where did his billions of dollars go? How was his money used? Well, let me list a few of them out for you. Modernizing public health buildings in Vietnam, AIDS relief in South Africa, fund surgeries for kids with cleft lips and palates, earthquake relief in Haiti, cancer research, health coverage for uninsured children, biomedical research at the Queensland University of Technology, various universities in Ireland, the University of California San Francisco Medical Center, Cornell University Tech Campus in New York City. Even crazier is how he lived. Despite being a billionaire, Chuck Feeney lived like a regular dude. He flew economy, he wore cheap clothes, he didn't own a car for many years. And most of all, he rented an apartment till he died. Just him, his $10 Casio F91W, and a plastic bag. He carried his stuff in a plastic bag. His philosophy is called giving while living. Like, why wait until you're dead to do good things? Why build a legacy when you can actively fix problems now? No one knew about him until Forbes wrote about him and how he gave up all his assets to Atlantic Philanthropies. They called him the billionaire who wasn't. In 2020, at the ripe age of 89, he officially closed Atlantic Philanthropies. The amount of money left in the nonprofit was $0. His billion-dollar nonprofit charity closed down because it accomplished its goal of giving away all of its money. How sick is that? A charity closing down because they did everything they wanted to, all to benefit other people. Chuck Feeney didn't want statues, he didn't want his name everywhere, he didn't even want credit. He built a fortune with the sole purpose of dismantling it in order to improve the lives of millions of people across the world. Due to his quiet giving, no one really knows the exact total of how much he gave, but it's estimated to be around $8 billion over the course of his lifetime. Not sure if they adjusted for inflation or not. Like, I know $8 billion doesn't seem like that much, at least compared to the likes of Jeff or Zuck who got hundreds of billions, but those guys are spending their wealth on wife statues and Italian weddings. And Chuck, well, he just wanted to use his millions to help people. He said one time, "I cannot think of a more personally rewarding and appropriate use of wealth than to give while one is living, to personally devote oneself to meaningful efforts to improve the human condition." And this is why, to me, Chuck Feeney is really cool. So there's my list of 5 really cool people that you probably haven't heard of. If you have heard of all these people, congratulations, I'll squeeze your butt cheek or some, but I guarantee you there's at least one person on here you had no idea existed. So yeah, thanks for watching, like, sub, and that's about it.